Donald Trump is at war with the BBC, and it's just the latest stage of his attempt to neutralize the media, whether that be at home or abroad, as he sets about creating an autocracy in the United States. Now, I'm going to set out the Trumpian war against the media, which isn't being discussed nearly enough, and how it's part and parcel of the destruction of democracy, however flawed American democracy is rigged in favor as it is in favor of wealthy elites and big business. Now, Trump has filed a $10 billion lawsuit against the corporation. This centers on how the BBC program Panorama edited a speech he gave to his supporters in Washington before they stormed the Capitol in 2021 in an insurrection which he personally incited, which is a crucial detail, of course, in all of this. Now, to be clear, the BBC Panorama edit was misleading. It presented Trump as if he said in one breath, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you. And we fight like hell." But this spliced together two different points in the speech, which came about an hour apart. The BBC apologized for that and they were right to do so. But they're fighting the defamation case, which they're also right to do so. And I say this as an arch critic of the BBC's general news coverage, not least, of course, of Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. And that's because the edit did not change the substantive point, which is that Donald Trump incited an insurrection on January the 6th, 2021, in a failed attempt to overturn an election which he had lost. Now, before I talk about Donald Trump's deeply sinister war on the media, I just want to clarify again, just to make clear what happened in the run up to that insurrection. Donald Trump had repeatedly falsely claimed that the election had been rigged and that it was, a lie. The results were falsified. That he had actually won that election. That's sufficient incitement. He's telling his supporters that the election was stolen, as he kept saying, it was stolen from him. That's in itself, that is more than enough to incite an insurrection amongst his radicalized supporters. But he had promised in the run-up a big protest in DC on January the 6th, be there, and he said, "Will be wild." What does that mean? In the speech on the day, he said, "And we fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore." He also said, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong." Yeah, I mean, it's clear what's happening there. It was clear what was happening at the time. As the Capitol was being stormed, his aides, his congressional allies, and even his own daughter pleaded with him to tell the insurrectionary mob to go home. He refused to do so. In fact, as the violence spiraled, he tweeted about his vice president, Mike Pence, that he didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. That is, didn't overturn the elections. Quite understandably, that was understood as incitement, given some in the mob were talking about executing Pence. It was until more than 3 hours after the insurrection began that he recorded a video asking supporters to go home, while also adding, "We love you, you're very special." Trump was then impeached by the House for incitement of insurrection, although then, thanks to his supporters, he was acquitted in the Senate. In the House of Representatives report into the insurrection in 2022, it was concluded that Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Interviews with the insurrectionists by the justice system made clear they were acting what they understood as the wishes of Trump. He later pardoned them, which itself, legitimizes political violence because those who act violently on his behalf think to themselves, "Well, I can get pardoned by him later on." But I want to talk about this wider point about the assault on the media. I read about this in The Guardian, but what he's done is use the playbook of Viktor Orban in Hungary, that's a far-right autocrat, who's trashed the substance of democracy in a campaign of attrition, including getting supporters to buy up the media and then change their editorial stances to support the regime. Let's call that Orbanization. Now, Trump, of course, has routinely denounced the US media as the enemy of the people. He declared that Comcast, which owns NBC and MSNBC, should be investigated for its country-threatening treason. He declared that the fake news threat is a threat to this country, as well as repeatedly labeling the media as the enemy of the people. He also described them as the enemy camp, the language of open warfare. He issued an executive order entitled Ending Taxpayer Subsidization of Biased Media, which ended public funding for the public broadcasting PBS and NPR networks, which he derided as this monstrosity. When US news organizations refused to submit to Pentagon rules allowing them to report only officially sanctioned information, their press credentials were revoked. Trump also unleashed a barrage of vexatious lawsuits against media outlets. And ABC News and CBS News both caved. That sent a clear message to the rest of the press: don't mess with Donald Trump. When the pro-Trump chair of the Federal Communications Commission demanded action against the liberal comedian Jimmy Kimmel, his show was, temporarily at least, pulled from the air. Now, Jeff Bezos, who's the billionaire owner of Amazon, once was a vocal Trump critic. He's the guy who popularized the Washington Post slogan after buying the paper, "Democracy dies in the darkness." As the 2024 presidential election approached, his posture shifted. On the very day executives from his aerospace company met with Trump, the Post editors were blocked from endorsing Kamala Harris. And then a month into Trump's presidency, Bezos announced that the paper's opinion pages would no longer run columns described as what he said was personal liberties in free markets. That's just a thin euphemism for right-wing economics. Trump's circle is obviously familiar with the model of urbanization I've discussed. Having previously sued CBS News and demanded its broadcasting license be revoked, Trump was thrilled by a subsequent change in ownership. And you shouldn't blame him. The billionaire Larry Ellison, Oracle's co-founder, and his son David, a Hollywood producer, are described by Trump as friends of mine. They're big supporters of mine. Ellison Sr., whose fortune is surpassed globally only by Elon Musk, has poured tens of millions into the campaigns of Republican political candidates. He also took part in a call just after the 2020 election, which explored strategies to undermine the result. Now, in August 2025, Skydance Media, which is owned by the younger Ellison, and that bid was backed by his father, acquired Paramount Global. Trump could barely contain his delight, hailed Ellison as a great man. He knows very well he was going to do the right thing by the network. When Skydance moved to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, that's the owner of CNN and HBO, a senior Trump official openly stated that its ownership is very important to the administration, warning that rival bidders would encounter regulatory hurdles. And urbanization didn't stop at the gates of the traditional media. Trump was fortunate that the far-right billionaire Elon Musk took control of Twitter during Biden's presidency. And of course, he's deployed its enormous online reach in the service of the Trumpian cause and far-right fanatics. In his 2024 book, Save America, Trump had accused Meta's owner, Mark Zuckerberg, of conspiring against him, vowed he'd spend the rest of his life in prison if he tried it again. Months later, let's put it this way, his tone had changed somewhat. Trump was effusive, praising Zuckerberg and other tech executives as great and saying they had shown him a higher level of respect. Small wonder. Meta lifted restrictions on culture war flashpoints dear to the Trumpian right, like immigration and trans rights. Fact-checking, which had curbed Trumpian disinformation, scrapped. Trump allies were installed within Meta's management and governance structures. Now, US politicians had long pressed to ban TikTok on national security grounds, citing its Chinese ownership. But, this is an example of how Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people has boomeranged, if you like, in terms of how it's played a role in the destruction of democracy because of the determination to suppress those who oppose the genocide. The Republican Senator Mitt Romney explicitly linked the push to ban TikTok to what he called the overwhelming number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites. Republicans such as Josh Hawley and Marco Rubio, before the latter became Trump's Secretary of State, demanded the app be shut down over its anti-Israel content. The anxieties were eased, let's put it that way, by a takeover bid for TikTok's US operations, including, of course, ownership of its all-powerful algorithm, which determines what users would and would not see. The bid was led by Larry Ellison, who we discussed. He reportedly agreed to donate to Rubio's failed 2015 presidential campaign after being reassured that Rubio will be a great friend to Israel. An associate of Ellison had earlier written to former Israeli Prime Minister Ed Barak, lamenting the growth of the Palestinian solidarity movement in the US and insisting, we believe, that we have to embed the love and respect for Israel in the American culture. Pro-Israel politicians in both parties had been furious that younger Americans were gaining unfiltered access to the reality of Israel's genocide. The result? Yet another social media giant firmly brought to heel. Now, the BBC, as I discussed at length on this channel, has grievous faults. That's not just actually about Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people. It's how it presents politics. It's how it talks about economics. It's kind of pro-corporate, pro-austerity positioning. Rampant institutionalized bias. And a lot of these corporate media firms have, again, we deserve so much better. They're dire. And, they, whether it be Israel's genocide or whether it be, the economic system or kowtowing to elites and all the rest of it, terrible. But what's going on here is Donald Trump is trying to set up an autocracy in the United States. He's trying to set up an authoritarian state in the United States. That's what's happening. The BBC has a footprint there, but it also is one of the main global media organizations. And it's just an attempt to create a chilling effect that no one crosses Donald Trump, that that generally media executives, editors, all the rest of it make decisions, editorial decisions, not to cover aspects of Trump or to challenge him or scrutinize him for fear of the consequences. That's what this is about. It's deeply sinister, obviously, beyond sinister. Will democracy survive in the United States? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's a big question mark. I think it's big question marks over democracy in the West generally. I wrote a book called The Fall of the West for a reason. Let's put it that way. So I think it's worth just noting that we should obviously have deep criticisms of the BBC, which I've made clear over and over again, till I'm blue in the face. But this is just part of an attempt to shut down media scrutiny, to just create an authoritarian state in which there is a general chilling effect and media organizations do not challenge Donald Trump. That's what it is. Let's call it what it is. Please like and subscribe. Help us take on the terrible media ecosystem that I've spoken about at patreon.com/owners84. You make all this possible. Do far more when that book is finished. Do share the video, press like, subscribe, leave your thoughts, leave your comments. I'll speak to you soon.